Hey, 42 here. I take you, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. Or not? What if death wasn't the end of marriage? Well, for hundreds of French people every year, it isn't. Necrogamy is the act of marrying the dead. It's been legal to marry the deceased in France since 1959. And every year in France, hundreds of ceremonies are held to marry an individual with a deceased significant other. Whilst not as common, posthumous marriages are also practiced in the US, Germany, Sudan, Thailand, China, South Africa, and South Korea. Now, it's easy to see why people who have tragically lost their soulmate would want to do this. It's a beautiful, symbolic gesture. Very odd, but beautiful. But guys, what if quite the opposite happens? What if you get sick of your wife? And I don't mean like that time when you had to take a sabbatical in the garden shed for 2 hours. I'm talking about actually selling your wife. Now, before you go and list your beloved on eBay, just hold on a minute because it's a little more complicated than that. Not to mention illegal. And you'll just end up with a slap to the face and a few more hours in the shed. Wife selling is not just an urban myth, it's a very real part of global history, particularly in Old England. Although it is frowned upon today, and rightfully so, throughout periods in history, wife selling was incredibly popular. So then, let's go shopping at a 19th century market in Britain. A Victorian-era English market was a feast for the senses. The smell of freshly roasted ham and coffee beans, tussled with the ghastly scent of animal and even human sewage running down the street. The sound of cattle and squealing pigs pervades the air, as did the chatter from the crowd, brimming with vagabonds, thieves, the wealthy and the not so wealthy. All of whom had to compete with the street hawkers selling their once most prized possession, their wives. Roll up, she's hard-working, deceptively strong, and younger than she looks. Only 5 shillings, a real bargain, folks. Men selling their wives was a common sight at markets in Britain. Beginning in the late 17th century, this common practice continued all the way until the early 20th century. The first court of divorce was established in England in 1857. Before this, it was very costly and difficult to detangle oneself from their wife. If a man wanted rid of the wife, or vice versa, the man would have to pay the present-day equivalent of £15,000 for a private Act of Parliament. And you had to obtain the blessing of the church, which was about as easy as splitting an atom with a sledgehammer. So, unsurprisingly, poorer members of society, especially those who had large debts, would look to sell their wives instead. Wife selling was particularly popular in the West Midlands of England, but Yorkshire held the crown with the most number of wife sales between 1760 and 1880, and the only place in the world where a man could probably still trade his wife for a pie today. Men would sell their wives usually to pay taxes they otherwise couldn't afford, or to settle gambling debts, or simply to buy food in times of famine. Now, obviously, being sold as a chattel isn't exactly nice, but more often than not, the decision wasn't forced upon the wife, and a lot of the time, it would be the woman's idea to be sold in the first place. If a marriage went sour and the couple were no longer happy together, it often made more sense for the woman to be sold, and at least she could be with somebody else, rather than continue their deeply unhappy relationship, even if she didn't see any of the profits from her sale. Regular divorce was just financially out of the question for the vast majority of people. So, the decision has been made. The wife's gotta go. But how exactly does a man go about selling a person, his own wife nonetheless? Well, there was actually a semi-official system for doing so, and it was surprisingly simple. The man would take his wife to the market with a halter around her neck, just as he would one of his animals. Shocking, I know. He would then have to pay a small market toll, which would allow him to sell goods at the market that day. The rest was simply a matter of good sales chatter. He would parade his missus around on a leash, bellowing her benefits and features from the top of his lungs. And when he had gathered a crowd of a few interested punters, the auction would begin. Auctions usually started at a few pence, but could rise all the way up to £1. Yes, £1, depending on how desirable the auctioneer's fair lady was. Now, there may still be small inequality issues in society today, but it's fair to say we've come a long, long way from the days when you could tie your wife up like a pig, take her to market, and flog her for £1. However, women weren't simply offered to the highest bidder. She had the option to veto offers at her will, if she didn't like the look or smell of the gentleman in question. Once a winning bidder had been found, the exchange would take place, which was basically a mini marriage ceremony on the street, or often in the pub, right there and then. Before the Marriage Act of 1753, in England a marriage did not require a formal ceremony with a vicar. Marriage was no more than an agreement between two people. Even after the Marriage Act came into effect, these quick street marriages still took place, but the church simply refused to recognise the couple's union, but that didn't stop people. Astonishingly, money wasn't the only commodity exchanged for a man's wife. Here's an actual snippet from the World newspaper on November the 12th, 1790. A man at Ninfield Stocks in Sussex last week sold his wife to another man of the same place for half a pint of gin. The purchaser being in liquor at the time the bargain was concluded, the seller, in order that he should not complain of any unfair advantage, having been taken of him, took his dear spouse to bed and board until the next morning, when the buyer attended and claimed his lady, who was delivered by the husband in due form, having a halter round her neck and 2 witnesses present. The woman appeared overjoyed at the change, nor did the man seem less happy at their lots. Now, if you didn't understand any of that, a man sold his wife for half a bottle of gin, she was overjoyed, and he couldn't care less. After an exchange, the now ex-husband handed over a toll ticket, basically a receipt, to the new husband as a proof of sale. The act of wife selling was slowly phased out until it became completely unheard of by the mid-20th century, as divorce courts became more prevalent and cheaper. Well, in England at least. However, wife selling remained a thing for many years in a few other countries, even if most of the time it was illegal. Today though, there is only one remaining country that commonly practices wife selling: India. In rural India, particularly in a region known as Bundelkhand, life rests on that year's harvest. If the harvest is poor, then a famine is guaranteed. In times of desperation and starvation, many families turn to the local pasawala, a wealthy man who lends money. The local pasawala will loan farmers money, but the loans come with extremely high interest rates. And if the years ahead are also drought-filled and lead to poor harvests, then the farmers may not be able to sell crops and pay off the expensive loan. In such situations, they have but one option: sell their wife. The farmer will either sell his wife to another man and use the funds to pay off the pasawala, or, more often than not, the pasawala will themselves take ownership of the man's wife and keep her as payment, forcing her to live with him for as long as the debt remains unpaid, even if that is forever. What's even more sickening is that if the pasawala believes that the farmer's wife isn't valuable enough to settle the debt in full, then they may take the farmer's children also. Sadly, this part of India is renowned for its inhumane treatment of women. But what about in the Western world? Have there been any records of wife selling in the modern day? Well, unbelievably, yes. And it takes us back to the historic home of wife selling, Yorkshire. In 2016, a man from Wakefield, Yorkshire, listed his long-term wife on eBay. After a long day at work, the 33-year-old man returned home to be subjected to his wife moaning at him, to which he replied, "Right, I'm going to put you up for sale." The listing was simply titled, "Used Wife." The description included the following: good points, bodywork and paintwork still in decent shape and has some skills in the kitchen. Bad points, often makes this noise that cannot be silenced unless you order brand new shiny parts of metal. And offers welcome may consider a part exchange for a younger model. The auction reached £65,000 before it was removed by eBay. Thankfully, it was just a joke, and the couple are still happily together after he bought her many shiny things to say sorry. Thanks for watching.